Hello. I want us to think today about hope, where it comes from, how you build hope, how you can instill hope in others. Paul, at the end of his letter to the Roman Christians, said something that I think helps us to understand what hope can be and what it can do. May the God of hope fill you with all joy and peace as you trust in him, so that you may overflow with hope by the power of the Holy Spirit. So there's that sense of hope being something that overflows, that is not just superfluous, but that flows more and more. But how does that happen? One of my favourite people was a man called Abraham Joshua Heschel. He was a Jewish teacher who emigrated from Europe to the United States around the time in the 1930s when it was dangerous to be a Jewish person in Germany. In one of his writings he said this: "A religious man is a person who holds God and man in one thought at one time, at all times, who suffers harm done to others, whose greatest passion is compassion, whose greatest strength is love and defiance of despair." Now it's these two phrases I'd like us to hold together as we think a bit further about hope. To overflow with hope and defiance of despair. And to do that, I want to talk about three different incidents that happened in a place where I have good friends, and it was these friends who were at the centre of what happened. So one friend called Eleanor knitted and knitted, almost inexhaustibly knitted. She did many other things with her life, but she did a lot of knitting. And what she knitted, along with another group of friends, were squares that were made into knee rugs, shawls and various other garments to keep people warm. And in the time that she was doing that, it's reckoned that something like 1,200 articles were donated to local care homes, and that's apart from thousands of squares, millions of stitches, which became blankets and other garments that were sent to places like Malawi, Tanzania and Nepal. That person and those people were people who were hope builders. Their hope overflowed into the lives of others. It was the overflow of generous love and long hours knitting and chatting, and then giving away the work that they had done. They attended a church which recently closed. That church had several beautiful oak communion trays for holding individual communion cups, glass cups. And rather than just either give them away or let them go somewhere where they wouldn't be used, they had partnered with a church in Ghana. Those communion trays and those cups, which had been used for decades in that church, are now in Ghana. And the interesting thing about that is it's a quite different take on the phrase, the communion of saints. Because one congregation, which over the years began to shrink and eventually closed, passed on the cups and the trays that had been their shared communion to other Christians in a quite other part of the world. And in doing that, a new communion of saints took place, an overflowing of hope. In fact, my cup runneth over with hope. That same church, when it came to eventually vacating the building, had 100 reasonably new pew Bibles. What to do with them? So someone phoned the local city mission, and they took them. And they gave them out to people who didn't have homes of their own. One by one, these Bibles became the personal property of a lot of people, overflowing with hope. And the thing about it is this: those women who were doing their knitting, those communion cups and trays that had been used hundreds of times by one congregation, sent to another in another part of the world, and those Bibles, which rather than just being dumped or left somewhere simply to grow old and unused were put in the hands of people who were really glad to have them. All of these are stories which are the defiance of despair, the overflowing of hope. And so, as Christians trying to live in the kind of world in which we live, there's a very real ministry called to be an agent of hope, someone who actively makes hope happen, to be conduits of hope, that is, people through whom, by actions and words and attitudes, hope is able to flow, and so to become builders of hopefulness, people who are defiant of despair. Listen to Heschel again. A religious man is a person who holds God and man in one thought at one time, at all times, who suffers harm done to others, whose greatest passion is compassion, and whose greatest strength is love and defiance of despair. And as Paul said, so that you may overflow with hope by the power of the Holy Spirit. Thank you for joining with us today and for sharing this time, and God bless you and give you that sense of overflowing hope.